Hey, it's Nikki. Let me show you how I turned plain Dollar Tree wood into a cozy primitive snowman for winter. I'm starting out by gluing 2 pieces of wood from my stash using tight bond wood glue and just adding a little hot glue for that instant hold. Then I clamped them together and set that aside to dry. Next, I'm taking this Dollar Tree wood and I'm going to paint it the color Ivory by Waverly, and then I'm going to set that off to the side to dry. For the second piece of wood, I'm going to use a little bit of water on the wood because it absorbs so quickly, and I'm using the color Ink by Waverly mixed with a bit of water to give it a stain look. I wiped it back with a damp rag so the wood grain still shows through. Then I dried it up using my embossing gun. After that, I painted the 2 smaller wood sticks in that same stain to keep everything cohesive. And then I just used some tight bond quick and thick, some hot glue, and kind of held it there for a second and set that off to the side. Now I'm taking a jumbo popsicle stick and cutting it down into the shape of a nose. I didn't want it to look like a perfect triangle since we're going for that primitive vibe. So I played around with the shape a bit and used my sander to round it out and give it a more handmade look. Once I was happy with the shape, I used my pencil to sketch out where I want the eyes to go. I placed the nose down first just to help me figure out the right spot for everything, kind of like mapping out his little face. Then I painted the nose the color Pumpkin by Waverly, just going over the front and the edges to make sure it was fully covered. Once the paint on the nose dried, I went in with the color Burnt Umber by Apple Barrel and added a few little lines and ridges or grooves, whatever you call them, just to make it look more like a real carrot. I also added some shading around the sides to give it a little more depth and dimension. I set that off to the side to dry. Then I grabbed my favorite black chalk paint that I always get from the Dollar General, and using a small paintbrush, I painted on his eyes in a soft teardrop shape. It just felt more fitting for that primitive look than plain circles, and I really love how it gives him some personality. Once his eyes dried, I went in and gave him some little eyebrows, and I added some sweet lashes just to bring his expression to life a bit more. And after that, I let everything dry for a moment before gluing on his nose. To finish off his eyes, I took a small paintbrush and added a little bit of white at the bottom of each one just to give him a soft highlight. Then I used my nail dotting tool and I added a large pupil in each eye first, and then I used the small part of my dotting tool and added a small dot to each one. And that just adds some sparkle to his eyes, and that's when his whole personality really came together. To give him some sweet, soft, rosy cheeks, I'm using Tim Holtz Distress Ink in the color Worn Lipstick. I wasn't thinking ahead of time. I should have done his cheeks before I glued on his nose, but I'm just going to embrace it. To make his mouth, I used a wooden dowel dipped in that same black chalk paint and just gently dotted it into the shape of a little smile. I love how simple it is. It adds that sweet primitive charm without being too perfect. Then I went in with a bit of that watered down black chalk paint I used on his hat and added some soft speckles all over his face. It's one of my favorite little touches. It gives him that distressed primitive look that I love. At this point, I'm using my black paint marker to add a few finishing touches, just going over his nose, his eyebrows, his lashes, just giving a little extra detail to his whole face so everything will just kind of pop a little bit more. Then I switched to my white paint marker and added a few squiggly lines across his nose and his cheeks. It just gives them a little more texture and that hand-drawn primitive charm. And I also dotted a few little highlights. Well, I shouldn't say a few. I dotted highlights across or on each circle around his mouth just to bring his sweet face together. I went over the whole thing with Paint Chicor's Extreme Satin Glaze, and I didn't realize at the time that that kind of erased my cheek color. So once it dried, I went back in with more of that Distress ink and touched them back up. And when I was happy with how they look, I went ahead and added the white lines back to his cheeks, and that just completed the whole look. Now I'm going in with Paint Chicor's Antiquing Glaze in the color Brown Sugar. I just dabbed it lightly all over the snowman, making sure to avoid his cheeks because I don't want to mess those up again. Um, the thing is, with that extreme satin glaze, once you put that on, you have a lot of play with your project because it's real easy to pull some of the colors back with that top coat. I absolutely love it because sometimes I just overdo, but this makes it easy to blend your colors in and, like I said, pull your colors back. This step really adds that vintage worn-in feel that I absolutely love. It pulls everything together and adds some warmth and depth to the piece. Now that everything is good and dry, I went back in with my Distress ink in the color Soot and brushed it around the edges of his face. It gives him more character and helps tone down the brightness, perfect for that old world primitive feel. Then I grabbed my Titebond wood glue and added some along the bottom edge of the hat. Plus I filled in the back where the pieces meet, used a small scraper to press it into the gaps, and then I wiped back any extra glue with a damp rag. You can't see this part very well, but I added some hot glue and then carefully placed his hat and his head together. And I held it for a few seconds just while it set. Before adding anything else, I went back in with that homemade stain and touched up the front and the back of the hat just to deepen the color and even things out a bit. I also added a little bit more distressing to his face. You'll see that in a second. Next, I grabbed some homespun fabric. I had a piece that was already torn and frayed from a previous project, and I had woven a strand of fairy lights through it. So I wrapped that piece around my snowman's hat and then glued that in the back. Then I took another piece of that fabric, frayed the edges, and laid that right over the first one. After that, I added some pretty red berries and a little touch of greenery. I just tucked it right under the fabric and secured it with some hot glue. That really gave it that classic primitive look, simple but so cozy. Next, I grabbed a piece of burlap ribbon from my stash. It had been in there a while, it's all wrinkly. I shaped it into a simple awareness style bow. It doesn't have to be perfect. The little imperfections just add to that primitive charm. And then I used a bit of floral wire to tie it off and hold its shape. That's one of the things I really love about primitive projects. Whether it's neat or a little wonky, it still ends up looking perfectly rustic and full of character. There's just something so cozy and forgiving about the style. Now I'm taking a small handful of Excelsior and bunching it up into a little nest. Nothing fancy. I added some hot glue and pressed it right under where the bow is going to sit. And of course, I'm using hot glue to glue it down. I'm gluing down my burlap bow that I just made right on top of my Excelsior. And then I grabbed more of that homespun fabric and made two little bows. I'm going to layer them. I hadn't mentioned the part where I added the floral wire, but I'm just going to take this pencil and create little spirals. It's a simple touch, but I love how it adds a little bit of whimsy and just a little bit of personality to my piece. Lastly, I'm gonna dovetail my bow, fluff it up a little bit. Now I'm showing you what it looks like with the lights turned on. And while I did like it, I wasn't completely happy with how dim it looked. It wasn't what I had visioned. So off camera, I decided to weave in a second set of fairy lights. That little extra glow really made a difference and helped everything pop just the way that I wanted. And here's the finished piece. I'm really happy with how it turned out. It's simple, rustic, and full of that cozy primitive charm that I love. The lights, the layers, the little details, it all came together in such a sweet way. Let me know in the comments what you think. Would you make something like this? I'd love to hear how you'd style your own version. This was really an inexpensive project to put together, especially if you have some scrap wood and fabric on hand. And don't forget, I'll be decorating the backside of this snowman in an upcoming video with a fall theme. So you'll be able to use him throughout more than just one season. I hope to hear what you think down in the comments. I so appreciate you guys taking the time and sending me beautiful, sweet messages or just anything in general. If you enjoyed this project, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And until I see you again in the next one, bye.